Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone from wherever you are joining us from. My name is Jiun Kang, and I work for the Transport Sector Office of ADB. Now I am overseeing the e-mobility support and investment platform for the Asia and the Pacific region. I'd like to warmly welcome you to today's webinar, Developing Interurban EV Charging Network in Bangladesh by Koen Van Baekel. This webinar is organized under the e-mobility support and investment platform for the Asia and the Pacific, which aims to build up the capability and support the scaling up of e-mobility financing. The platform is operated by ADB in collaboration with the UNEP and co-financed by ADB and the Global Environment Facility, GEF. If you'd like to join the e-mobility community under the platform in order to stay up to date on the platform's activities, please fill in the assessment survey where you can leave us your contact details in case you have not done so already. The QR code to the survey is now available on the screen, and we will share the link to the survey in the chat as well. In this webinar series, we have an exciting lineup of discussions planned for you. On the screen now, you can see the upcoming webinars till the second quarter this year. In our next webinar taking place in 2 weeks, Mr. Devendra Nasbi from the Green Climate Fund will present innovative financing strategies and funding models applied to countries across the globe in steering the transition towards sustainable urban mobility. We will share the registration link to the webinar for the next one in the chat also. Town planning from our implementing partner, Integrated Transport Planning, ITP, will be moderating today's session. So let me hand over to Tom to guide us through the rest of the webinar session. Thank you.
Thank you, Jiwoon, and hello everybody, wherever you're joining us from. As usual, begin with a few house rules. So your microphone will be muted throughout the course of the presentation today. We can open it if you would like to speak. Let us know in the chat, and you can use the Q&A function if you'd like to ask a question to our speaker today. So yeah, please do pose any questions to us as they sort of come to mind, and I'll pick them up during the Q&A at the end. Next slide, please. Okay, so today's presentation will be delivered by Koen Van Baekel. Koen is a director and advisor on infrastructure, transit and cities at Rebel. He's also co-founder of Zeroca. He has 15 years experience across the financial and strategy sectors, and he has a strong background in financial structuring, procurement, business analytics, and has been involved in both e-mobility and autonomous mobility as well, which are the two spaces that are not mutually exclusive. So Koen will be presenting some of his work and sharing some insights that pave the way for a sustainable and interconnected EV charging network across the intercity road system in Bangladesh. So Koen, without further ado, I'll hand over to you to take us through your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you everybody for joining us here this morning. I'm very happy and honored to have the opportunity to present to you today, and I will proceed to attempt to share my screen. It should work because we did test it, and you should be seeing my screen come and appear on yours about now. Is that right, Tom? Presentation mode as well?
It's not in presentation mode, but I can see the slides. It's in presentation mode now.
Excellent. So the subject I will be presenting to you today is on digging ones for road transport decarbonization, and indeed with a toolkit application, a case study for EV charging development on the intercity motorways in Bangladesh. This comes from a work commissioned by ADB, and really I think it sits in a broader discussion about what the world ought to look like in the future. And I think everybody has very strong ideas, of course, about the transitions that we're all going through and where we have to go with that. And I think everybody here on this call has in some way, shape or form a specialization in transport. And so the question is that is before us here. What is the shape or form or direction that the roads of the future should take? And of course, everybody then thinks back to qualities like inclusiveness and efficiency, and especially these third, fourth, and fifth quality referenced here: resilience, cleanliness, and being intelligent and connected. And those last three correspond very closely to what is commonly understood to be the sort of action areas in which the transport sector has to progress in order to meet the challenge of climate change and climate adaptation. And so the question before us then is really how to decarbonize our road transport system and to make it adapted and resilient and maximally responsive to the challenges of the future. And one of the areas, and indeed the area that we have looked at as part of this study, is how to integrate the physical and the other elements of road transport decarbonization into a regular approach to road development and road network management, where one of the hurdles, one of the really big challenges that we've always faced is that in almost all cases, our road network is legacy. It's there. We might upgrade or tinker with it a bit. We might occasionally add a greenfield road infrastructure, but we realize that there is an awful lot of cost and disruption associated with the fitting of roads and energy networks to accommodate new stuff, whether that's road transport decarbonization elements, for example, related to EV charging, whether that's about telecoms or any other kind of infrastructure that is competing and striving for space in that same road corridor. So once you've dug it, it's pretty expensive to go back to it and to throw it all open and fit new elements and new physical infrastructure within that same road infra. And that's kind of the background where the concept of digging once comes in, and the scope of what we've been asked to do and delivered is to develop a toolkit for road transport decarbonization that has a broader sort of regional and I would even say rather global relevance, and then also to take that toolkit and build a roadmap for the case of the Bangladesh motorway network, and sort of plot out how this dig once concept could be mainstreamed in policy making and in the road sector strategy, and specifically with a focus on the development of a specific pilot project or stream of pilot projects in intercity motorway EV charging. The art of digging once is defined here as the installation of, I'm going to read this one out because it's a definition, the installation of conduits and ducts and cables and surrounding infrastructure, making reservations for anything to be put in place in the future during the development of major maintenance of road infrastructure. This is the generic definition, and really to strive to include these elements at the get-go, such that we don't have to open up the road or or close down the accessibility of the infrastructure later on to do so. And then the transport decarbonization aspect comes in under the second bullet point shown here, where those elements are to be utilized for electric power transmission, for clean power solutions and services, for other interventions related to clean energy systems, but also to telecommunications and to other aspects which we believe future-proof our roads for the future today. So that is at the same time a very important point to make, that the principle of digging once, whereas this toolkit focuses on transport decarbonization, is of course digging once for anything and everything that we consider relevant and relevant to the future of the road network, and that we don't want to have to dig twice for to include. And the schematic on the right really shows you what we're looking at, where from a dig once strategy, which is a reduction in costs, because we don't, for construction and for complicated project requirements, we don't have to open up the road twice. And of course, the extra little bit of cost that comes with that is we do for a while potentially underutilize some bits and pieces of the infrastructure that we put in place. And we complicate the additional construction and realization of a road upgrade or a road network as well, because it's always a pretty complex piece of infrastructure to begin with. And so we're just adding in extra elements. And that's the business case concept that one has to work through in order to kind of find the rationale and kind of underpin that for digging once. And the metrics and numbers in that can vary quite widely across different applications, cases, and sectors. But what is clear in terms of the cases is that this is a concept that is mainstreamed and being mainstreamed in many different places and jurisdictions already. So some of the cases you see mentioned here are referencing the federal dig once policy in the United States, the federal or union level dig once policy in India. And so there's a range of them, and I would highlight specifically the dig once principle was really applied in implementing ducts and cables in the telecom sector for the implementation of optical fiber cable along the entire stretches of the national railway network. So in different sectors, and typically in the telecom sector, this is not an entirely new principle, but what this toolkit really sets out to do is to leverage it and to deploy it for facilitating and accommodating the decarbonization of roads, and specifically, of course, decarbonization. One of the first aspects coming in there is always the element of clean energy and of clean energy charging for electric or for battery electric or otherwise electric vehicles. So those are the elements that we've highlighted here and that are included and addressed at a bit more length in the toolkit. We'll be looking at electric power and clean fuel transmission and distribution infrastructure, and how to include that on integration of EV charging into roadside infrastructure and service areas. But also looking at, for example, the potential of generating off-grid and feeding into the grid energy using some of the surface area of the road core that's otherwise unused, but that can be used safely and leveraged for generation purposes. And then there's the element of anticipating the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns in terms of the future innovations that we expect still to see happen in our road networks. And again, that comes to being sort of adaptive and prepared for what might come in terms of what we're seeing now already. For example, roadside charging through induction charging, integrating charging infrastructure into the main roads, surface infrastructure. So there's this road of the future concept that looks at, I think, the immediate challenges of the next 5 to 10 years, but I think even longer term, the nature of the investments and the assets that we invest in the road network are such that we really have to challenge ourselves to look further ahead. And indeed, with a little reference back to Tom's introduction, that also goes, of course, for autonomous driving, which on intercity motorways is quite straightforward. But as you get more and more into cities, more complicated. But that's not the main topic of discussion today. The toolkit really facilitates very broadly kind of the mainstreaming of this approach by supporting, especially with a focus on member countries, supporting the mainstreaming of this kind of idea of a DIG-1's policy in terms of what the goals would have to be, how you develop it together with stakeholders in the transport sector in country, how to develop specific products and opportunities for deployment, and then kind of putting the meat on the bones of that in terms of what the business models would be and what specific mechanisms and solutions would be to make this work in practice almost on a day-to-day basis. So really trying to sort of work top down from the very principle of DIG-1s through to what does that mean for decision makers and for road agencies and for transport agencies in the practice of day-to-day management. And maybe one aspect of that to zoom into in particular is the question of the business models. Basically, what is done is that the DIG-1's concept is peeled apart, where we say, look, there's a number of layers that can be meaningfully main road project or the main road infrastructure that one would consider in the first place. And those DIG-1's specific layers relate to the insertion or the inclusion of spatial reservations and conduits and pipes and kind of really the physical requirements for DIG-1's. So those are defined here as the first layer. The transmission layer that's required for transmission of energy mainly, but just as well in case of other sectors, the transmission of data through OFC, through optical fiber cables or comparable technology. Very relevant to transport decarbonization is the consideration of the third layer, which is generation. So really making it very explicit that we do have a great deal of space in our road network that's not safe to build property or any kind of other structure on, but that's quite safe enough to deploy generation assets from solar energy, most notably. And then the sort of more complex systems, and finally the services related to especially the charging services, but also the kind of more advanced services around that in terms of offering subscription products, offering easy charging with postpaid or prepaid. So really the kind of customer facing business services that are required and that facilitate the easy use and the adoption of the charging service in this case. And so one has different ways and approaches to bundle or unbundle these elements very much in the same way as one has different ways of packaging traditional sort of the main road infrastructure into traditional procurement or public-private partnerships and recombining and combining construction and maintenance and so on. And really what we're trying to do is to find meaningful and relevant configurations here in the models 1, 2, and 3, and 4, where those are combined and packaged in different ways that make sense, that offer options and different ways forward for road authorities in terms of who gets to be responsible for what in implementing DIG-1's specific assets and services, and not just the sort of responsibility for realization and maintenance and for carrying the cost of those or potentially harnessing the revenue and commercial upside of it, but also the question of always who picks up the bill and who feels the pain when something goes wrong, which is all about the risk allocation, which is really where the question is, where does the bill land if things go wrong, but also indeed, which is also another part of risk that one tends to forget about, where is the upside of things go very, very right. And upside and downside in these terms are potentially very significant quite quickly, because with a lot of this infrastructure, the fixed costs are relatively predictable, but the variable costs and revenues related to whether there is use, whether the users of the road are picking up on any of the additional services or any of the additional infrastructure capacity that is there, is quite variable, and therefore provides a huge marginal return, either negative or positive. For Bangladesh, this toolkit has been deployed, if you will, into a specific case of how institutionally, at the level of policy goals, and in the cooperation between ministries and agencies, this principle of DIG ones could be mainstreamed with a view to introducing transport decarbonization, introducing motorway charging, and other components of this DIG ones toolkit. And the different sections of the toolkit indeed concern all those aspects shown here. So policy development, how do the different ministries and agencies need to work together? And this is quite relevant because very often there is a lot of competition for the very, precious and scarce space of a road corridor. And so to bring institutions around the table early on and ensure that they're all aligned around the same goals is indeed quite important. Checking if there's anything in the legal and regulatory space that inhibits the progression of this and the implementation of these principles, and then more concretely ensuring that the different institutions, and indeed the institutions jointly, have the capacity and the wherewithal to adopt and to promote and progress the DIG ones approach, and perhaps most importantly, to ensure that there's also project action hitting the ground. So really to achieve a concrete result from this DIG ones policy, and how we've kind of set that up, and that speaks to the roadmap that is included in the toolkit as a template that has been rolled out and deployed into a roadmap specifically for Bangladesh, where 3 phases are distinguished. Firstly, getting set up around your DIG ones policy and around potentially what could be done, learning and progressing second, and really rolling it out as almost a business as usual and routine approach thirdly. And so in that first phase of getting set up, the step in the roadmap, or the key step, would be to identify a pilot project for implementing a first fast charging center, identify the business models, the involved stakeholders, and really use that while at the same time defining and calibrating the sort of aims and principles and institutions involved in making sure that this works as a DIG ones approach. Secondly, to see through the implementation of this first DIG ones project as the corresponding main road infrastructure project is undertaken, but not to sit idle at the same time, but also to further identify the kind of first overall generation of DIG ones transport decarbonization projects that could be undertaken under the same approach, and to learn and to document from that the sort of approach, and to refine that, so that in the third stage this can become a full, almost like a business as usual program by the Roads and Highways Department of Bangladesh and the institutional partners within government, so that this approach would facilitate and indeed accelerate road transport decarbonization and clean energy solutions, EV charging solutions, of grid generation in the road sector in Bangladesh. And with that, I think I pause and I hand it back to the moderator, because gosh knows, I think we've heard enough of my voice, and I'll have a sip of coffee in the meantime. Thank you, everybody, and thank you in advance, Tom.
Thank you, Koen, and I think you've earned that sip of coffee. Very much think it was an excellent presentation. I think it was great to have first of all an introduction to the Dig Once toolkit. I kind of like the way it's kind of branded and presented. It gives it a real sort of practical focus. Totally on board with the concept of course, and highway maintenance and renewal can be quite a reactive process still, and I think you've outlined quite neatly in your presentation the benefit of strategic planning. And of course, e-mobility is interesting in itself as when you think about what needs to be developed and altered on a highway network, but also autonomous mobility as well takes it a step further, which I know is an area of your work too. So just to highlight, as we move through to the Q&A, please do post any questions that you have for Koen in the Q&A feature. I will pick them up and post them. I think just while we wait for questions to come through, Koen, just to kick off. I mean, it strikes me that there obviously you presented the business case there quite neatly for Dig Once. Cost saving seems to be a big, at least intuitively in my mind, a key benefit, and I know you touched upon that in your presentation. Do you have any evidence or estimates of what the potential cost savings from applying the Dig Once toolkit could be?
Yes and no. So yes, there are a large number of cases, not only policy level, by the way, but also project level that have been documented in Dig Once that kind of go into the delta, so the potential cost savings that the project stakeholders expect to have achieved from applying this Dig Once policy. They're quite varied, so it's very difficult to aggregate and kind of generalize them into a single number that you could apply and say, well, this is roughly what's expected. It is interesting for policy discussion whether governments will want to apply some kind of a hurdle or benchmark level where they say, well, we ought to do the homework and pin down. We would need at least a 5 or 6 or 10% cost efficiency from digging once to justify the risk and the extra complexity of doing it. Very much alike, how in procurement you would test value for money and apply a hurdle rate, where you say, well, we could do integrated contracting or public-private partnership contracting with financing included, which is a lot more complex if it's justified by the additional value for money from doing it in that way. So I think that's an interesting discussion that can be continued. The toolkit references all these sources and helps the readers and users to think through and to see what's possible and what has been possible and achieved elsewhere.
Okay, thanks, Koen. And okay, so the next question is how applicable is the Dig Once toolkit to countries beyond Bangladesh? So countries you've developed it for in this case study for Bangladesh. What actions, if any, would need to be undertaken to make it applicable elsewhere? I guess is the inputs that feed it kind of very Bangladesh specific, or are they more more varied?
So the toolkit is, I would say, and it was also set up and intended to be that way, rather generic. It really focuses on the member countries of the ADB, but even more broadly, just generically, it focuses on what would a government have to do to mainstream this in order to achieve road transport decarbonization. So it's very global almost in that way, and what's been done in the toolkit is there's a separate cases being added where we've really sort of dived into the made it concrete what this would look like in the case of Bangladesh. And the good news is also that as I'm aware, this toolkit is slated for publication by the ADB, so I believe sooner or later it would become available also in the public domain, and anyone interested could pick it up and run with it.
Okay, no, that's really good to know. And I guess in terms of the challenges to its adoption, Koen, I know you talked a little bit about sort of potentially incurring greater upfront costs to achieve benefits down the line from digging once. I guess that's partly why we have a society of digging twice or digging thrice, is that it's maybe cheaper now, but actually the benefits and the wins come later down the line. I mean, is that a fair assessment? And what key challenges do you perceive to its adoption, if any?
I think that one of the main challenges is that. Well, let me actually highlight two, which I think are relevant. Firstly, I think I already mentioned there is institutionally competition for space when it comes to these kind of the kind of linear infrastructure or the networked infrastructure and the corridors of that. Whereas we're all pursuing the public interest. Institutionally, it sometimes is difficult to get everybody aligned around what that means because institutions also tend to have their own interests. So I think really the challenge of solving that puzzle and creating something that brings everybody around the table is something that is a challenge, and that's addressed in this toolkit. And then I think secondly, the kind of routine processes of clearing what different institutions and agencies at both national and regional and local level are planning in terms of their projects, in terms of what they're going to do in the same space or in the same corridor, or crossing specific pieces of road, or is something that is the principle of digging once being put into practice, and to develop and institutionalize and regularize kind of those kind of systems and processes is the challenge of a dig once policy, because really if this kind of an approach is mainstreamed only at the policy level with a couple of objectives and everybody making supportive statements, it's very unlikely to go anywhere until the folks maybe the next level down and the next level down are able to figure out how to work through this in their day-to-day practice, if that makes sense. And there are examples of solutions that achieve that on a more institutional and structured basis, and those are also again referenced in the toolkit.
Thanks, Koen. And we have a few more questions coming through. Is this the first of its kind? Is this the first of its kind toolkit for lower and middle income countries, or more globally in general?
So I feel almost anxious to respond to the question, because one can only know so much about what's been published in the public domain. So whereas we have seen very many policies and sort of comparable public sector aims being followed, I haven't come across a toolkit that supports countries through the journey of mainstreaming this in this way. So I stand to be corrected, and I probably will be making a statement in this way, but I haven't seen one as yet. So I think it's quite interesting that the ADB has decided to support member countries in pulling one together and kind of helping them to think about and to giving them the tools to mainstream dig once in this way, with a view to decarbonizing road transport.
Thanks, Koen. And we have one further question. So if there are any questions that are spinning around in people's heads, please do post them. Can you talk a bit more about business cases of successful examples, US, EU, Pakistan, perhaps. How has the dig once principle become bankable in these cases?
Right. So the bankability of the Pakistan case, which is very relevant, very similar to the Bangladesh case, by the way, is around the area of, or it's really about the area of or the sector of the dig once implementation, which is not primarily about the transport sector, about decarbonizing transport, but it's about telecoms in those cases. And so the idea, the principle of digging once is, as I said, to date, more often seen in telecom solutions where a lot of road and rail authorities decided that now there is a lot of demand for rolling out additional telecommunications capacity in a network kind of way throughout the country, and therefore they've embarked on ensuring that a road or railway project that's undertaken includes, or in the case of Karachi, incidentally, a BRT project being undertaken includes the capacity for optical fiber cable deployment, not only for their own purposes, so in the case of railways for signaling and for sort of rail control purposes, so in the case of the BRT system for interstation communications and ITS, but also for other purposes, because the sort of proprietary purposes of those developers, be it a BRT agency or a railway agency, typically take up only percentage points of the total capacity of the optical fiber cable, and the remaining capacity is essentially rented out or sort of locked in and sold to telecom service providers. And of course, that's to my other point where the implementation costs are rather fixed, but the marginal extra return from using the dig once infrastructure that's put in place, especially when you think about something like optical fiber cable, is really quite relevant. So the commercial potential of those has been a big driver of most of the dig once implementations that we've seen so far. And so I think, again, what this toolkit does is really to take that same approach, that same thinking, and says, now let's look at business models and let's look at the commercial side and let's look at the implementation side, but let's look towards transport decarbonization and not only towards the kind of digital connectivity aspect of these roads of the future.
Thank you, Koen. And I think that takes us to the end of the questions that have come in for you. I mean, if there are any more, get them in quick, and we can pose them. However, otherwise, in the absence of further questions, just like to thank everyone for their time today in joining us, and a special thanks, of course, to you, Koen, for your presentation. We will share the recording with all participants as soon as it's ready, and we hope to see you next time for our webinar on accessing green finance for low emission transport in DMCs, which will be delivered by Deb Bassoon from GCF on the 27th of March, same time, 3 p.m. Manila time. Just to shout out before we close, that we are sort of planning our Series 3 webinars as well. So if you'd like to present, you have something that you'd like to share with the group, do get in touch with myself, with the ADB team, and yeah, we can have a discussion around that. So those webinars will be from July to the year end. The ones that Juwoon took us through on the screen earlier are for sort of the second quarter of this year. So they're already in the diary, and they'll be shared around very, very soon. So thank you all again for your time, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you very much for joining us today.